Hello, my friends. Welcome back to my channel, Citizens React. After the episode Geography Now Canada, I was very curious about your border with the US. It's a really huge border. I really wanted to know how this can be managed, and so I got a suggestion about this border. And yeah, here we are. Let's see what we have here.
Canada and the United States share the longest, straightest, possibly boringest border in the world. But look closer and there's...
Yeah, it's a really big border. I think it is the biggest border on the world between two countries. They said in the other video.
plenty of bizarreness to be found. While these sister nations get along fairly well, they both want to make it really clear whose side of the continent is whose, and they've done this by carving a 20-foot wide space along the border, all 5,500 miles of it.
Why are you cutting these trees? Can you not mark this point with something other? Poor trees.
With the exception of the rare New England town that predates national borders or the odd airport that needed expanding, this space is the no-touching zone between the countries, and they're super serious about keeping it clear. It matters not if the no-touching zone runs through hundreds of miles of virtually uninhabited Alaskan Yukon wilderness, those border trees will not stand. Which might make you think this must be the longest...
Yeah, but why? I cannot explain myself. I hope he will explain it.
straightest deforested place in the world.
Just put wire or something, maybe.
But it isn't. Deforested, yes, but straight, not at all. Sure, it looks straight on a map, and the treaties establishing the line say it's straight, but in the real world, the official border is 900 lines that zigzag from the horizontal by as much as several hundred feet. How did this happen? Well, imagine you're back in North America in the 1800s. The 49th parallel...
Yeah, they didn't have GPS back then, I think. So it will be very hard to make that big straight line.
One of those horizontal lines you see on the globe, has just been set in the 1800s. The 49th parallel, one of the...
Yeah, 49th, how was that? I was remembering this.
Those horizontal lines you see on the globe has just been set as the national boundary, and it's your job to make it real. You are handed a compass and a ball of string and told to carefully mark off the next 2/3 of a continent. Don't mind that uncharted wilderness in your way, just keep the line straight. Yeah, good luck with that. The men who surveyed the land did the best they could and built over 900 monuments. They're in about as straight a line as you could expect a pre-GPS civilization to make, but it's not the kind of spherical planar intersection that would bring a mathematician joy. Nonetheless, these monuments define...
Is it anything that can bring a mathematician joy? I'm not sure about this.
the border, and the no-touching zone plays connect the dots with them.
Okay, but wait. This here is pretty obvious that that's not straight. I think even back then someone would have to say, oh, I cannot see the other monument from here, so this is funny.
Oh, and while there are about 900 markers along this section of the border, there are about 8,000 in total that define the shape of the nations. Despite this massive project, Canada and the United States still have disputed territory. There's a series of islands in the Atlantic that the United States claims are part of Maine, and Canada...
Yeah, like always, the islands are the tricky part, because the most treaties didn't saw the islands, they just saw the landmass. And if you cover that big of a landmass in a treaty, you're blind for tiny islands.
claims are part of New Brunswick. Canada, assuming the islands are hers, built a lighthouse on one of them, and the United States, assuming the islands are hers, pretends the lighthouse doesn't exist. It's not a huge
How you can pretend this?
problem, as the argument is mostly over tourists who want to see puffins and fishermen who want to catch lobsters, but let's hope the disagreement gets resolved before someone finds oil under that lighthouse.
If you find oil, be sure the English will claim it also. They will say that was never part of your treaty.
Even the non-disputed territory has a few notably weird spots, such as this tick of the border upward into Canada. Zoom in and it gets stranger as the border isn't over solid land but runs through a lake to cut off a bit of Canada before diving back down to the US. This spot is home to about 100 Americans and is a perfect example of how border irregularities are born. Back in 1783, when the victorious Americans were negotiating with the British, who controlled what would one day be Canada, they needed a map, and this map was the best available at the time.
Let's see what we... Oh, I can't even find this lake here. Is this the lake they're talking? But it doesn't look like the lake.
While the east coast looks pretty good, the wester it goes, the sparser it gets. Under negotiation was the edge of what would one day be Minnesota and Manitoba, but unfortunately that area was hidden underneath an inset on the map, so the Americans and the British were bordering blind. Seriously. They guessed the border should start from the northwestern part of this lake and go in a horizontal line until it crossed the Mississippi, somewhere. But somewhere turned out to be nowhere, as the mighty Mississippi stopped short of that line, which left the border vague until 35 years later, when a second round of negotiations established the aforementioned 49th parallel. But there was still a problem, as the lake mentioned earlier was both higher and less circular than first thought, putting its northwesterly point here, so the existing border had to jump up to meet it and then drop straight down to the 49th, awkwardly cutting off a bit of Canada before heading west to the remainder of the continent.
But why just say, okay, Canada, keep this? I don't think it's such a big deal. That's not a big landmass.
And it turns out you can't just draw a straight-ish line for hundreds of miles without causing a few more problems. One of which was luckily spotted in advance, Vancouver Island, which the 49th would have sliced through, but both sides agreed that would be dumb, so the border swoops around the island. However, next door to Vancouver...
Yeah. Why you didn't exactly this to the other... to the other lake?
Island is Point Roberts, which went unnoticed, and thus today the border blithely cuts across. It's a nice little town home to over 1,000 Americans, but has only a primary school, so its older kids have to cross international borders 4 times a day to go to school in their own state. In a pleasing symmetry, the East Coast has the exact opposite situation, with a Canadian island whose only land route is a bridge from the United States. And these two aren't the only places where each country contains a bit of the other. There are several more, easily spotted in satellite photos by the No Time.
Yeah. Again, exchange the territories. I don't know why this is a big of a deal. Make a extra treaty on the old one. Here, this one is pretty easy. Here, this will be Canadian, this will be American.
Touching zone. Regardless of if the land in question is just an uninhabited strip in the middle of a lake in the middle of nowhere, the border between these sister nations must remain clearly marked.
Okay, it was a pretty interesting video. I think I got something out of it. I really enjoyed it, but I still don't understand why you can't exchange the landmass. It's not such a big of a deal. Did you find anything with value on that? Okay, I will understand, but he didn't mention anything. So, US, Canada, listen to me, exchange the territory. See you next time, subscribe and like.